Commission Public Meeting number 90 at 2:15. And we'll go to agenda item number 5, Rick Day, Executive Director.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And most of what I have today are items that we actually carried over from last week. And one item which I do need to, it's item, there won't be a general update, but it's item 3B. There is a summary memo already in your packet.
3B, the racing license.
5, excuse me.
Sorry.
5B. Concerns our contractor consultant, Pink and Company, and their contract. And as our project coordinator, Pink and Company has now had about 2 months working with the commission. Although they are working closely with the commission and staff to evaluate the pending slots parlor applications, we are finding there are some specialties that require a subcontractor to fill that specific need. That potential need was anticipated in the RFR, but not included in their original contract. And in order to address the problem, I would recommend that you authorize me, essentially, to initiate a technical amendment to the contract under Section 2.8 to allow Pink and Company, with approval from me, to enter into agreements with subcontractors or specialized services the consultant cannot provide with Pink and Company staff.
Do you know what rough order of magnitude we're talking about? What kind of money are we talking about?
We don't have specific estimates on what those monies are. At least I'm not aware. I know perhaps Jennifer can help with that. I know the rates would be the same as otherwise specified in the Pink and Company contract.
There's only been, thus far, one kind of service that's been identified as additional and needed, which relates to analysis of the housing issue in the Twin City area with respect to Fitchburg's claim of impact on it. So we will...
There's a couple of, for the Rainham-related application.
And also for
There are a
Rainham.
couple of ones that...
This, I believe, will definitely be less than $10,000 worth of services. More likely than 4 to 6. Again, it depends on
Okay.
how much of a controversy this becomes, but what I see so far.
Somebody have a
Yeah, no, well, I think it's great. It gives us flexibility. The RFR anticipated that, so I think it's a sound practice. I would just remind ourselves that we assess our applicants for these costs, and we just made an assessment on what we projected for all of our consultants, and this was technically not included. So as new costs surface, we need to make sure that we are assessing our applicants for these.
Well, I think the clarification on that the rates, which I didn't initially put in the recommendation, but it's supposed to be part of it, at the same rates that otherwise specified in the Pink contract. And then these recommendations, I mean, they actually come from the evaluation teams, which the commissioners chair themselves, and would come through Jennifer and essentially to me, and we'd end up authorizing that way. So we should have some advance notice of that. Anyway.
And at the recommendation of Mr. Lennon, these are going to be separately invoiced from just the general reviews of the application.
So there will be applicant-specific.
The applicant
They
specific.
could be separately identified to them so that they can also
Yes, exactly.
react to it. Great.
Do I have a motion?
Yep, I can move that we delegate to Director Day the authority to enter into subcontracting agreements relative to the evaluation of the Category 2 applications that we are currently undertaking.
Yeah, I don't think we really need to add this, but I think this sort of not to exceed 10,000 is what we're talking about, because I wouldn't be in favor of spending very much money to assess the impact of housing on Fitchburg. I don't think we need to spend money to do that. But if we're talking single-digit dollars, I'm fine with it. A second?
Second.
Any other discussion? All in favor saying aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Opposed? No, the ayes have it unanimously.
The next item was just an item that the commission had requested that we revisit with a discussion. And it's a couple questions and has a lot, mostly with the evaluation process. So I was going to pose the questions and then ask for at least Commissioner McHugh and Commissioner Zuniga to weigh in on those questions and their thoughts in particular. Essentially, it is how does the commission evaluation team handle instances where the evaluation teams identify, and there are two specific areas at least that I'm aware of, information that is not part of the host community agreement but is included in the application, and information that was stated in the applicant presentations or otherwise publicly addressed by the applicant but is not in the application as well. And then,
Could you repeat the first one?
yes, I would be glad to do that. Information that is not part of the host community agreement but is included in the application, and information that was stated in the applicant presentations or otherwise publicly discussed by the applicant but is not in the application.
What's an example of the former?
Example of the former is the 16 acres as opposed to 26 acres issue with respect to Cordish.
And that is part of the application?
It is discussed in the application, yes, in terms of the phasing.
Because I wrote somebody back saying that what I thought you
No,
had
no,
said,
no,
which was that all we are dealing with is
No.
the issue of the first 16.
All we are considering at the moment, all the building and site design group is considering is the 16-acre piece. But we're doing that pending resolution of this question. Because there is some alternate plans that are in the application that make use of the other piece of property. But for the moment, we put them to the side. We're just looking at the 16-acre parcel that was mentioned in the host community agreement.
I might have mischaracterized that.
I thought I saw the email.
Did you see it?
I think
Looks
it
all
was
right.
right.
Okay.
Because that's all we are considering now. But the question is, how do we deal with it?
And their presentation included the new parcel of land, that 90-minute presentation.
I don't recall that. It may have.
Oh, it did, absolutely.
It changed the time frame of the project.
I assumed that it was that,
Well, no, they have two, remember, they've actually got three pieces. They've got the initial, then they've got a secondary phase that has a hotel on that 16-acre property, and then they have a proposal that has the casino next door on the 10-acre parcel.
Well, yeah, and can I put a finer point to that?
Sure.
There's two alternatives, and there's a master plan.
Right.
And I forget if there's a master plan for both alternatives, but what you refer to about the hotel is a later phase of the master plan.
But it's on the original 16 acres, the hotel is.
Correct.
Right.
But their alternative includes additional
right.
acreage, which would then change
Right.
the project.
Right.
And move it from 18 months to 12 months, because they'd be using an existing building, correct?
I think the existing building is on,
the current
I'd have to
property.
go, is on the 16-acre parcel. I think they could use that building there. There may be one on the 10-acre parcel too, yeah. And the other one, an example of the other one is that in the Penn National proposal, there was in the Penn National public presentation, there was a flyover. They've got a traffic issue down there, a road issue down there, and there's a flyover that was in that presentation that's not in the application. And that is significant.
Well, let's take them one at a time. Let's start it with the first case. Just to give Elaine Hives, doesn't the question about if it's not in the HCA but comes about afterwards, wouldn't that apply, for example, to the Suffolk Downs situation? You know, the HCA, and referendum at best marginally would that fit
Well,
in this
they-
question?
They haven't filed their RFA 2 yet,
We don't.
so we don't have to.
Oh, I see what you're saying, yeah, right.
But
So,
it may impact
but
that, however
we're
we
sort of
decide.
setting a precedent here
That's right, yeah,
that would arguably
impact that.
impact that, yeah.
Although, who knows how plastic the HCA is?
Well, that's the threshold question, but in the hypothetical we're dealing with, or the case of the 16 acres, it was clearly not discussed at all, I think. Right? Well, I guess that's really the question.
Well, there is potentially a better example to deal with the HCA issue, and that is in the Leominster proposal, where the HCA requires the building of a police substation on the property. But when you look at the plan, it's not clear where the police substation is in terms of what's required for the state police and for the commission. So today, the applicant was very clear that they were going to build something in addition to that. But I think before the applicant discussed that today, that would have been an example of something provided in the HCA, but not necessarily clear in the application. And how is that addressed?
That's a different case.
That's a different
So
case.
that's a third case.
That's a
What's
third
in the HCA and not in the application. But the question was something not in the HCA, but in the application. Right.
I think there's 2 points here that apply that I think we should discuss. And these, on the one hand, these designs, we knew that they are conceptual, advanced conceptual designs by necessity. We like any construction, the design will evolve, and there will be a lot more refinement, along the way. And these topics will come up, not just now, but even conceivably after the award of a license. When we discussed this, I remember having a policy discussion relative to ensuring that we had a design review process that allowed us to look at how detail evolves between versions of design elements. And I think this is the first time that we're seeing that. But this question will remain. And when we had that discussion about the design review process, which is, by the way, an impetus towards thinking about having an owner's project manager help us throughout this design and construction, we anticipate that there will be periodic reviews, and ultimately, sometimes it may be within what we've all understood to be the design intent, and sometimes it's almost kind of like you'll have to see it and then make a judgment call. Sometimes that may be outside of what the original design and intent was, including what was represented publicly, or what was in the host community agreement, or what was not in the host community agreement. So that's one point I wanted to make.
I don't disagree with that, but I do think that given the legislation and given the heavy emphasis that the statute places on the summary of the host community agreement that's been drafted and put out for the voters to consider, the length of time that it has to be there, a plan that is materially different from the plan described in the host community agreement. Materially different, of course, being a term that needs work every time you encounter it. But a term that the reason that we conclude is materially different from the plan summarized in the host community agreement is something that shouldn't be permitted without at least an amendment of the host community agreement, so that the local authorities have an opportunity to go back and take a look at it and take into account changed impacts that this may have on the city and on the community. So I think that there shouldn't be, and until that's done, I don't think that we should consider it as part of the application. A lot of these a number of these host community agreements do have a clause that permits renegotiation for changed circumstances and the like, and there's not going to be another vote, but at least the elected leaders of the city, town, get a chance to weigh in on whether to permit this. So that's the dividing line I would recommend we draw.
And then we will be, I'm sorry, we will be then always considering what constitutes a material difference.
Yes, we will, and I, for my part, I would interpret that not to have a different color on the building, but I would consider that to be a substantially greater overall footprint, for example, or instead of a racetrack, we're going to have a baseball park. I mean, those kinds of fundamentally different things. There is going to be interpretive problems, there's no question about that. But the alternative is, this is all part of the game, and whatever you come up with, no matter what you said to the folks, we'll just make sure that you do what you say you're going to do now, and I don't think that's
That's an alternative I was alluding to, by the way. There's, and,
I know, I'm
But-
extending.
Sorry.
Another point that I was going to make is also that we did contemplate, and eventually we have to talk about it now, the notion that these applications, as per our regs, could in fact be improved during the process of review. We have that flexibility. I know that's one directive that when we came and when you came and said there's questions that we're going to be careful to ask that could come in at any time if they don't improve the application, but there's a milestone there relative to when we ask questions that may improve the application. And I'm not going to get the section right, but our regulations contemplate that the application could be improved throughout the process, because every time when we were writing these regulations, more often than not, we erred on the side of being flexible, having the flexibility of, if we get to that point, we will consider it then. And this is yet another flavor of the question before us.
Is a change in design substantially different than a change in operator? Or, I know, there are questions about a temporary facility, using that and being able to open in a more timely manner. And those are all changes, and I know the first two examples, I think, are directly related to the host agreement.
So,
Well, there's going to...
quick clarification, the Leominster Host Community Agreement does not specify the number of acres? The host community agreement with Leominster doesn't stake out 16 acres?
I thought that the summary did.
Okay. And the referendum
Yeah.
question clearly says 16 acres.
Right.
And
That's what I thought. Now,
well, we should, but
we need to check that out.
But that's the question about, would we permit it? It's not the abstract question about, what would we do if there's something in the application which is not in the host community agreement? And I would echo Jim up to a point. I think that seems to me pretty straightforward, that if there is something materially different from the host community agreement, and the host community agreement hasn't anticipated the possibility of change and accommodate that, then I don't think it should be permitted in an application. I mean, the whole point of this is that the host community gets to understand what's going to go on in their community and say yay or nay. Where it gets complicated is if there is a clause, it says, here's what we're planning now, but there's a clause that says, you know, the parties may change anything they want to within this with mutual consent. Let's say that the words are more or less clear like that. So let's say that take the Leominster example, and I'm just making this as a hypothetical. I'm not actually literally talking about Leominster, but say that the HCA does not anticipate, it's clear about the present plan, the 16 acres, but it does have a clause that says the parties can negotiate on major changes. The referendum goes forward on that. Then the applicant and the host community go from 16 to 26 in a different physical layout. Is that okay? I mean, if there's a clause in the HCA that permits that kind of change of material factors.
I would say yes, because, for two reasons. One, it's in there, but more important, that's the HCA the voters approved. And by their approval, they in effect delegated to their elected officials the power to make changes. And whether that was wise or unwise, that's there. And they still are the elected officials, and if they,
Right.
there's a remedy for their malefactions.
So if the public officials agree that the changes are, they're in agreement that the changes are for the best, is that what we're saying? That as long as the public officials agree with the changes?
And as long as the host community agreement that the voters approved says that the parties can change any of these terms
By mutual agreement.
by mutual agreement.
This is precisely on point for Suffolk Downs, I think. Assuming that there is a clause in the HCA
Well,
which we haven't read.
Well,
But
I don't think we
I
know
would,
enough
I
about
would really
that.
like to stay away from
Yeah,
that.
we don't know
but
enough
you
about
can't stay
that.
away. You can't stay. We're gonna, whatever we say here, we're gonna live with. So how can we not?
Because we don't, I for one don't know what the ballot question in Revere looked like. I don't know, I haven't read recently the Revere host community agreement. I don't know a lot of stuff. And I would,
I don't either.
Or what the
Well,
application
we don't
will
have
say.
the application.
You-
That's the
or
point.
what?
We
Right.
don't have the application.
We don't even have the
phase two
application.
Right.
Right,
We have
right.
3 of them
So
now.
we, I think what we do here, people who are watching can take into account as they plan their future actions, but I would hate to say what we're doing here affects something that we haven't got before us. I think that,
Well, let's talk about it. I mean, tell me if we can't do this, but this came up with a case in point. We are now wrestling with how do we deal with this issue in Leominster. We were presented one thing in the 90-minute presentation, which was, I thought, because of the way it was presented, I assumed that was what the plan had always been. As it turns out, that's not the case. It was, if it was anticipated at all, it was minimally in the HCA, although maybe, apparently there is a clause that says they can make major changes. So is it fair in a hypothetical community like that, even though the HCA said the parties can agree to major changes, is it fair for, within 6 months, for the governing body to make a dramatic change like that from the 16 to the 26 acres? And that's not a rhetorical question, that is a question. I'm just,
I think it, I think it is under the premise that the parties would agree. Let's not forget that a material impact or a material difference could be very well in the interest of the host community. A case in point, if there is an additional parcel of land that can be purchased that wasn't originally under option or agreement and can relieve parking, let's say, parking concerns, that could be exactly in line with what the spirit of the HCA may have been relative to parking problems, for example. And subject to the agreement of that party, I would venture to say, if it's positive, they would agree. If the HCA contemplated it, it's fine. If the community perceives this to be a negative impact, then they would have to figure out or
Well, it's not
potentially
the,
disagree.
It's not the it's the governing, it would be the
The
governing.
governing body.
If
yes.
they disagree, well, clearly if they disagree, the majority disagrees, it isn't gonna happen. But if it's split, if it, like it is in many communities, you've got splits. And what we're talking about here is authorizing, and this is the way most laws work, so it's not what we're talking about isn't so dramatic, but if there is the clear ability in the HCA to make material changes with mutual consent of the parties, then almost anything can happen, as long as the governing body is in support of it, whatever people voted for in their referendum. And all that, although that seems to me to be sort of consistent with a literal reading of the law and not inherently unreasonable, in context, I think it's not probably what people were thinking about, even though it's technically anticipated in the document. I don't think anybody went to vote in a hypothetical city X or town X that has a site laid out in the plan, all kinds of drawings. It's on 14 acres, and it turns around much later that the application is actually 28 acres in a completely different configuration of the property.
Right, and thereby is a question about what is material.
Well, that would be material.
What you just described is seemingly material.
And we're saying it would be okay if the local governing body approved it.
And that's if it was not in the host community, but it was in the application. What about a change?
It was not in the host community, except for a clause saying you have the right to make these changes.
I understand.
But it was
How
in the
about
application.
a situation where a change is contemplated and agreed upon by both parties, and it's not in the application?
Well, let's do one at a time.
Okay.
We'll get to that.
Okay.
It's a different case.
So one is,
Right.
okay, so,
I just don't know, I'm just not sure. I think that, anytime you sign a contract, and if it's got an agreement in there that the parties can change the contract, so they can change the contract, that seems pretty straightforward. But in this case, that sort of obscures what we're really talking about here.
Well, I think it's so hard to talk about hypotheticals that could apply to more than a few instances. I think this is the ultimate case by case. We really have to look at the merits of, what was drawn out, represented, or submitted, or described. What is now to be perceived the new submission, representation, or drawing, and have a discussion like this that is on specifics. And then hear from the two sides, somebody perhaps arguing that, this represents an immaterial change, in my opinion, and somebody else saying no, and look at all those specifics. If we try to come up with a framework that would apply to many instances, I would venture to say that it would be very difficult.
But isn't it helpful for people's planning and for the community peace of mind to know a general framework, i.e., that if it's a material change, it's okay, but only if the host community agreement contains a modification by agreement clause, and the governing body and the host community agreement has been modified to take into account the immaterial change. That still leaves a lot of questions and a lot of room for the process that you've talked about. And that process is one we ought to follow. But at least we have
That framework.
parameters and a framework for considering, if that's the way we choose to go.
Oh, in full agreement.
I have a little commentary to add here, and I would ask rhetorically, a change to what? Because I've looked, for example, I believe Leominster describes development on a certain parcel, but it doesn't reference renderings, it doesn't reference a site plan, it doesn't reference blueprints. We don't know what the community saw at the community meetings that they liked and they decided to vote on. Were they voting on the concept of a casino? Were they voting on the location, or did they really like the way it looked?
I'm not prepared today to vote on a Leominster proposal. I'm just
I'm using it as
using-
an example.
Yeah, but if, it seems to me that if the host community agreement or the summary describes a parcel of X size, and the application is built on a parcel of X, is double X size, that's an issue of the type that may qualify as a material change. That is fundamentally different, in my view, from a rendering that had yellow walls and now it's going to be pink walls, even if it's the building facade.
In my opinion, I would agree it's a substantial change. I was just questioning the, trying to define what would be a change that you would want the applicant and host community to agree to, other than something like that, which I think is really material.
Well, that's, I'm just talking
But-
about material
Yeah.
changes.
Well, what if, they moved to, instead of a parking garage, they did site parking? Or what if they put the parking garage on this side, then they moved it to that side? So,
We would have to decide whether we thought it was material or not. And those kinds of decisions get made all the time by bodies like this. I mean, if there's imprecision in, if there's imprecision in a host community agreement, that, and which you're suggesting in this particular case there might be, so then the question is changed from what? That's an interesting question.
That's the
But-
question.
But that doesn't, what Commissioner McHugh is talking about is a general principle. None of us has read the HCA for Leominster at all, certainly in my case, and certainly I doubt any of us can remember the summary, so we're not talking about Leominster here. We're trying, and we're certainly not talking about Suffolk Downs. We're trying to figure out generalizable, reasonable principles that can guide our applicants and host communities as well as ourselves. Because right now, we're in the midst of evaluation of programs, of applications, which raise some of these questions. So let's just say this again. So on the issue of a application which comes to us, which is materially different from what was envisioned in a host community agreement, and therefore a referendum, that we will consider that application so long as the host community agreement had a clause which permitted material changes with the consent of the community, of the governing body of the community, and the governing body has in fact executed an amendment to the HCA to that effect. That's the proposition on the table, Jim, is that correct?
Right, yeah, that's perfectly stated.
Right. Thank you.
I agree with that principle. It's obviously very broad and yet simple. I just hope that everybody has anticipated in their host communities that this could be an eventuality and they have a reopener clause.
Well, if they haven't, they haven't.
Well,
I would-
if they haven't, maybe it's a moot point because everybody does.
Well, no, they do not.
Okay.
And I would note that our regs do have provisions regarding modifications of mitigation agreements in a process that is laid out in that regulation.
What is that, Jim? Say that again, John?
There's
So
reopener
our
clauses.
regulations have provisions included in them for reasons of reopening a mitigation agreement,
Including those-
negotiations to reopen a mitigation agreement.
Which would include an HCA?
So even if it doesn't state it, they could still reopen?
But it is limited to certain circumstances in that regulation. And I would also raise the question of, as the commission is evaluating applications, at what point will the commission be able to determine whether the host community is going to amend its HCA? I mean, the commission has to make a decision on the applications. So as it goes through to evaluate it, would you raise that as an issue at the host community agreements? Would it be an expectation that if there was a change and there was a reopener in the host community agreement, would the expectation be that the amendment was done before an award was made? When I looked at these questions, I thought of them more in terms of how the commission would evaluate the applications before them in light of some of these differences. So I think it's important to focus on what the HCA provides, but I do wonder how we would know what the governing body thought at such time as before the award was made.
Well, in the way I framed it, what I had said was, and I think Commissioner McHugh said the same thing, is that the HCA had been executed to that effect, had been amended to that effect. So if there weren't an amendment to the HCA for the material, for the change, that portion of the application, which is a material change from that which was envisioned in the HCA originally, we wouldn't consider it, because there hadn't been an executed amendment to the HCA.
And I think that in fairness, we could, as an operating principle, flag that as soon as it appeared
up,
to us,
right.
and then have a hearing as to whether, and use Enrique's, Commissioner Zuniga's format, to have both sides in and decide whether it's a material change, and in the process, flag that so that if we decided that it was, people would have a chance to go back and amend the agreement, execute.
Right, or
not.
Or in the case, I mean, right. Right.
For example, I received an email while this conversation was going on from Joe Weinberg relative to his property, and a case-by-case example might be the best way to approach these things. Like, for example, he stated that the property that we acquired was identified in the referendum and our zoning, and they asked me to convey that to the commission. So
This is a hypothetical.
Right, that's why we have to keep remembering,
Correct.
we keep saying it, this is not about
this started as a
Leominster.
general conversation.
Right, and I've contributed this, and I take it back, anybody who's watching, we are not talking about Leominster, we're not talking about Suffolk Downs. We're trying to identify a generalizable principle that we can operate with when circumstances arise on a case-by-case basis.
I would only like to mention a couple of things which hopefully will not happen very soon, or that very many times. But there are instances where a significant change may be required by no fault of the developer, but by an unanticipated condition or an outside agency. You know, we hear the stories that maybe there's an ancient burial ground that was discovered and never anticipated, or a turtle that is in extinction, and that requires that the project be flipped over entirely, or that requires another kind of access road, and and it was never foreseeable, but those things happen from time to time. So as we talk about a material change, I would at least insert the notion of a necessary or unanticipated. And I don't know exactly how that goes, but if there's an outside agency, a legitimate unforeseen condition that necessitates a material change, I'm not saying that the parties should just accept it, but the solutions that may be required should be really the point of the discussions.
But whether it is a change because of an outside circumstance or a change because the parties want to change, the process is exactly the same. We're saying, yes, you could make a change from what was in the HCA. What we're talking about now is it's in the application. So if DOT has stepped in between HCA and application, referendum and application, and said you got to make a change, it falls under the the parameters of the outline that Jim
Well,
gave.
I was thinking,
Except that, could I just add a footnote to that? Because our regulations talk about
Their own, right.
the snail
I'm
darter
not going to
situation.
adjourn this, I'm just going
Yes.
to take a quick break so you can conduct.
The regulations talk about the snail darter kind of problem, even if there is no clause, I think, am I right?
That's correct.
Yes.
That it permits an amendment and has a procedure for a reopener in that kind of situation. That's really a different kind of
Okay.
situation than a voluntary change by one side of the material change by one side.
fair enough.
Is the regulation that specific? Where
It
gives-
is, yeah.
It is.
So it's not anticipated that it be used for a mutually agreed upon change, it's,
Unless a provision is included in the host community agreement. So if
Correct.
there's a provision in the host community agreement that allows for changes to be made, it can be guided by the host community agreement. Otherwise, if changes are made, our regulations provide for changes upon a significant and adverse material impact, which can then lead to a petitioning of the commission to be allowed to change the host community agreement.
okay. And some of the agreements have this reopener clause and some do not.
That is correct.
Most do I recall?
I would think that, I haven't done
Trying
a
to
survey,
remember.
but
You sent them one by
my
one as they
sentiment
came
is
in.
most do.
Okay.
So I'm sorry.
Just from the, what I heard was the commission would or would not consider, but I guess what I'd be trying to get to is what consider means. I mean, does that mean poor rating? Does it mean the application gets rejected? And how would the commission actually process that decision? Would it go into a question for the host community meeting?
Well, it seems to me that Commissioner Zuniga's framework, I just throw this out for discussion, is the appropriate way. As soon as that is discovered, i.e. as soon as what somebody believes, and probably one of these reviewing committees that we have, believes that there's a material difference between what was in the host community agreement or the summary and what the application says, then we start a process that flags that and invites both sides to come in, the applicant and the host community to come in and explain to us what the difference is and whether they agree. And if in the meantime, after we flag it, they agree, then we don't have any issue to decide. But we simply try to get at that as early and as quickly as we can and have a hearing to decide whether it's material and then give them the opportunity to address it.
When you refer to the summary, you're talking about the referendum.
The referendum summary, yeah. Because in some cases, the site is described with more particularity than in others.
Jim, if this was, I think, so this is a process that would only happen after applications are in.
Right.
Right, because we would then almost as part of the completeness check, you know, the administrative completeness check, we could be trying to find out whether there are major apparent disconnects between what was anticipated in the HCA, and then surface those problems right away, those issues right away.
Right.
Okay, do we have a consensus on this one? I don't think we need a vote on this, right? We just, okay. It's a very meaningful point, however. Now, the second case was something which is,
Publicly discussed, but not in the application.
or in the HCA. Oh, sorry, not in the application, okay.
Right.
So,
Either in a presentation or publicly discussed. but
Public
not in the
representation.
right,
We're going to have X amenity. That's presented in the unveiling, it's presented in community discussions, it's not in the application.
does this independent of whether it's in the HCA or not, I guess?
Yeah.
Okay, so the issue is, it's publicly discussed as if it's a reality, but it's not in the application.
Right.
Okay.
So we have no idea really, in any formal sense, what it looks like, what its dimensions are. We've got schematics or something, but it's not anything that's in there for us to get our hooks into. And it's not rose bushes as opposed to
Right.
azaleas.
And it's prior to the award, right? Because I
While
kept
we're
talking about scenarios after the
Again, it's
award.
material.
This
yeah.
is while we're evaluating.
While we're evaluating.
And would this include a change that the agreed-upon parties would like to make, but maybe it hasn't been publicly discussed?
Yeah, it would include anything that has a life outside the application.
Let me think of, let me venture this. Something that is publicly discussed or represented, either in a presentation to us or to the host community, or is likely something that could be cross-referenced across more than one part of the application. For example, it could be not in a drawing, but in the budget, or vice versa. Or it could be part of a mitigation plan, but not in the budget.
This is a different issue, right?
Well, but the point is that if we're only thinking about, this one area where we're evaluating it, I would just remind ourselves that, there are places that some of these issues could be cross-referenced.
Yeah, and it seems.
And assuming that it's nowhere.
It's nowhere.
I mean, if that's the assumption,
If it's in one place and not in another, then we have to ask for clarification. We've had those issues.
Yes.
This is if it's nowhere.
if it's nowhere, if it's really something that they have no way of showing that,
If all of a sudden a applicant starts saying, we're going to pay $500,000 a year to the 5 surrounding communities, but it's not in their application, can we take that into consideration?
that actually may be not a good example, because there's still some of these host community, surrounding community agreements being
not used.
Well,
executed.
but amenity X.
Right.
We have that
Mitigation
one.
effort.
We have that one, and hypothetically, we have an interchange at a highway, and that's been discussed. It's in the PowerPoints, it's in everything, but you go to the application, you can't find any interchange. And that's entirely a hypothetical.
Right. I mean, I'll go first. I mean, it seems to me that we can't do that, that we cannot consider things which are significant that are not in the application. Among other things, that goes against the principle that we talked about earlier, which is you don't get to dress up your application ex post facto once now you found out what somebody else did. You couldn't make a distinction between those two things.
To add an additional point, I would keep our focus limited to the public presentations made before the commission after the applications are due. I mean, to go back.
I'm sorry,
We're talking about, it's not in the application, but publicly presented. I would keep the public presentation to what we require after the applications are due. I mean, there have been hundreds of public presentations back in the community. I'm assuming we only want to see what the difference is between the public presentation after the application's due and what's in the application.
if, I guess it's, for me, we might want to make that comparison, but it would be simpler, if the rule were, if it's not in the application, it's not part of the application. Then we wouldn't have to worry about
And shouldn't be
what
part
was
of the
said.
public presentation either, by the way.
It shouldn't be, but we wouldn't have to worry about
Right.
whether there was a difference between the public presentation and the application. If it's not in the application, it's just not part of the application. It could have been part of the public presentation, it could have been part of every presentation, but it's not in the application. It's not in the application. I mean, that's a simpler rule.
Yeah.
Does anybody have a different view? What would be the argument on the other side?
Well, the argument on the other side is that there could be, and our regs anticipated this possibility, eventualities in which they could improve their application while it's being reviewed. because they came up with, now, is this material or immaterial? We can talk about that, but because there has been a refinement, an additional understanding of MIPA requirements, and an additional understanding of certain permitting. We were working really hard towards one deadline, but now we know a little bit more. And I know we're only talking about a short time frame, from receipt of the application to award of a license, but it's not an inconsequential time frame, and there could be legitimately good reasons to improve that application. And
the hardest case, would be if a state agency, a regulatory agency, forced a change on somebody which made the project much better. And that happened during this window of time. Could we not consider that? That's the hardest, I think that's the hardest case. But
it's easiest to consider, in other words.
well, it's the hardest case to say no to. In other words, if our
Right.
principle is you can't, you can't consider things which are not in the application, what about something like that, which has nothing to do with the action of the applicant? But for the moment, set that aside. I do want to explore this point. You've said several times now that our regs anticipate people improving their offers after the applications are in. Could you explain that?
This is what our regulation said, and it says, and it's Regulation 11804, and it would be 1H. So it says, it talks about the applications coming in, and then it says, in doing so, the commission may, at such times and in such order as the commission deems appropriate, take some or all of the following actions. Then under section H, it says, require or permit the applicant to supplement or amend its application as the commission determines to be in the best interest of the host community, one or more surrounding communities, or impacted live entertainment venues, the region, or the Commonwealth. So our regulations do present the concept of an amendment, and I know some applicants have come forward and asked, what does that mean? But our regulations don't say any more than that.
What is the first word? Read the H again.
H is require or permit the applicant.
Require or permit, okay. Well,
And remember, the operative word here, in the best interest of the community, the Commonwealth, and the application.
but if we let that stand, then after applications are in, applicants would practically, as a practical matter, be encouraged to come forward with enhancements that will make this better for the region, better for the Commonwealth, better for a host community, whatever. Because there's a window there that says right up until the moment we decide, you can keep upping the ante, in effect. And it says may. I mean, and my instinct is with the rest, but this is an important thing to talk about, everything else we've talked about has been the door closes at the application, except for clarifications and so forth. And if we don't mean the door closes with applications, then I think we have a whole different kettle of fish here. Maybe it's a kettle of fish we want, but to encourage applicants to keep upping the ante after they've seen what the competitor has done, right up until the last minute, I don't think that's where we've been coming from, and I think that's the right way to go. But I think we need to get this resolved one way or the other.
Well, maybe the best way to deal, I'm in favor, that's the principle. I
Closing
think
the door
makes-
is one that you
Closing the door
Right.
is the default.
Right.
I think that ought to be the default, because otherwise it's just the Wild West. But perhaps the rule ought to be, what's in the application is all we're going to consider unless and until the application is amended with the commission's approval. And then we have the opportunity to apply that regulation and also to find out why that wasn't in the original application. And if it wasn't in the original application because of an oversight, and that may happen, where some of these people are working on tight deadlines, that may be one thing. If it wasn't in the original application because they saw it in somebody else's application and want to go one better, then
But would that mean, Jim, that we would be inviting people to submit things and we might let them amend it? It would just be on a case-by-case basis? Send us your ideas and we'll take a look at each one of them?
Approve or disapprove.
Yeah, I think that would be the logical implication of having that end, that discretionary power,
Right.
retaining that discretionary power. But that's what the existing reg, as Catherine read it, says we have already.
Right, but it's a may, and, you know.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah, okay.
I wouldn't change that.
Okay, but I thought, what I was thinking is structuring a little bit differently, that what we say as a matter of policy, even though we have other authority, is that what's in the application is the application, period. No, and if there are other things, the media talk about other things, they come up later on, it was talked about earlier, whatever, it doesn't matter. If it's not in the application, it's not there. We do reserve the right, I would say, when we make a selection, to go back to the selectee and say, you're it, but here's what we want you to do. Or take another case, say we only have one applicant, and the only negotiator is us, is we. Then we would clearly use that clause to go back and say, you know, just because you're in the application doesn't mean you're gonna win this, here's what you gotta do. And then we would have the option to require, in this case require, but require or permit. So that we have a pretty clear break here, that the door closes at the application. If you forgot about it, that's too bad. If you talked about it earlier and changed your mind, doesn't matter. It comes up late, doesn't matter. If it isn't in the application, we don't consider it. However, we do reserve the right, when we are negotiating a license with somebody, to use that clause
Negotiating a license after award,
after selection.
selection?
After our internal, I mean, if we sit here and decide, okay, we like applicant one, but we don't like this piece of it. We want to go with applicant one, but we don't like this piece of it. Or we don't like applicant, we like applicant two, but we want them to do a little more on the something or other, the community mitigation. That is the point at which we would exercise the right assured us under that reg.
Can I ask you,
You'd want the ability to negotiate as opposed to just start laboring things into conditions of the license.
Well, you have, there's another section of that particular regulation, the section before it, G, and that says, require or permit the executive director with the assistance of the commission's agents and employees to negotiate with the applicant and its agents and employees concerning potential improvements to the applicant's proposed gaming establishment, its mitigation plans, and its proposals to ensure economic and other benefits to the region and to the Commonwealth. So it might be what you're discussing in terms of after a selection may be more applicable under the provision before G as opposed to under H. I know in the legal department, the example that we come up with most often under H is a situation where an application is submitted, the commission goes out to the host community meeting, and it hears from the community something along the lines of, we think this project is great, but we're concerned because we think there should be an additional left turn lane off this road. So we think that should happen. And then the commission comes back from that meeting and perhaps says to the applicant, we got this input. We think you should make this change. That was the more common example
And
under
this is
H.
while the competition is still going on.
It's still going on, yes.
You had something to say?
well, I wanted to ask a question of you. Take an example like a flyover, something that has become publicly known or was part of those presentations, and it doesn't seem to be in the application anywhere. Would that be the kind of question that you would want to direct to the applicant at the host community meetings?
Absolutely.
And
At
that
the
might
latest.
be, you know,
Well, why, if it's not in the application,
I'm asking the question.
not with what's on the table at the moment, we're not.
Would it be one, or if we'd heard about a new left turn
It wasn't in the application.
and wasn't in the application,
application.
would that be a way or a means or a time to have that discussion with the applicant?
I would
That's the
venture,
question.
yes, that's a big reason of the host community hearing, in my opinion. If there's, we gotta listen to genuine concerns, and if there is a reasonable way to make that happen, why could the applicant not improve that?
Well, I think the applicant would have to improve it. If, for example, it was material, I mean, if, it could be that the applicant would have to make the change, and we could ask about it. How are you going to get left here or something during the discussion? But it seems to me that kind of, that's the kind of thing that goes as a license condition when we decide at the end, rather than having questions arise, supplements to the application being made, and then those supplements to the application breeding other applications. It turns into it has the potential to turn into a cascade around which we'll never get our hands unless we hold it until the end, accumulate a bunch of things. And in part, some of our evaluation process is already accumulating those lists. Places where people are getting an unsatisfactory or insufficient are not knockout blows, but they begin to form a checklist of things that have to be fixed, if they get the license. So,
But if the scenario, if we wind up with one applicant, and would you rather have that opportunity to negotiate as opposed to impose all those license conditions, and the applicant says, I don't want to do all those, and walks away? Highly unlikely scenario, but.
Then you go to the next one. I mean, I think that.
No, you're down.
Talking about one.
Oh, you're
One
down to one.
applicant.
Well, then they walk away.
but I think I think you could ask the staff to go negotiate and talk to them about it.
If there's only one, yeah.
Even if there's only one.
Yeah.
If there's only one. And go talk to them about it, see if they're willing to do that. So,
When you say if there's only one, that means we're contemplating making a selection?
No, only one applicant.
Oh, there's only one in the
Hypothetically,
region?
he's got, yeah.
Hypothetically, one
Oh,
applicant left.
Well, but what I'm hearing here is that we could ask for improvements, but they can't do them on
They
their
can't
own.
offer improvements.
I see this question as all, and even those regulations, is all commission initiated as opposed to, do you take my little new file that I slip under the door or want to send in? Which we wouldn't consider.
I agree with that, except that I think I'm with Jim, that this is there are two different ways to go. I don't know that there's anything wrong with either one of them. I mean, we talked, for example, about whether we wanted to have a best and final process, and we decided not to have a formal best and
For the slots parlor, by the way.
We do have a best and final for the
No,
casinos?
we have not made that decision.
okay.
But our decision was for the slots parlor.
Okay,
Not to have
I didn't know that,
process.
but whatever. But the point
I
is,
didn't know that either.
I don't remember that, but.
We should go back
Have
to
to
the
come,
minutes.
have to come to
Come
the
back to
meeting.
the number.
But it's a totally different way to go. I mean, we could be going back and forth with all the applicants right now and trying them to up the ante and fix this and do that. and,
right.
Get them to bid against each other. There's nothing wrong with that. Lots of people have bidding processes like that. I don't particularly favor that for the reasons that we've talked about before, but it's a different way to skin this cat. But I think it's pretty hard to be half pregnant here. Either you can't enhance your application after it's in, until either you're the only one standing, there's only one applicant, or we're about to pick you, and we put it in terms of license agreements or whatever, conditions or whatever. Either it's that, or you can enhance it, and it's sort of Katie bar the door.
Well, can I just, in your first scenario, you cannot enhance your application on your own. But if directed or asked by us, which right we have, could that still be a possibility?
If what?
If it was directed or initiated by the commission?
Could we go to Catherine's point? There's not, we hear this good idea about an off-ramp. And what I'm saying, and this is something we have to figure out, but what I'm saying is no, because I don't think that's fair to the other applicants. If some good idea comes up, or there's a resistance that we permit a solution to, what about the other guy who's got a good idea or a resistance that they could come up with a solution to? That's what I mean by, I think it's very hard to find a limited basis outside of a public agency forcing a change, which I think is a separable case. I think it's hard to create a scenario where there's room for some enhancements, but not others. Even if it comes from us, because we'd have to say to everybody, you all got a chance.
I don't want to complicate things further, but
You can't possibly.
But I do
We're there.
recall that in earlier discussions around this very concern about applicants being able to unequally improve their applications, one of the things that was discussed as an opportunity to kind of equalize that opportunity was to use the very public host community hearings. Among other things, as I understand the way they're currently envisioned, the applicants will have an opportunity to make another public presentation. It's possible that some of these things that we've talked about that have been perhaps in the public presentation but not in the application may become part of that presentation as well. Or for instance, some of the issues they've heard from surrounding communities in the interim negotiations might be a reason that they wanted to respond to a condition that they would present, and it would at least be in a public forum, so that we had, tried to encourage questions that would allow for that improvement to happen in that public forum. And I believe it was Commissioner McHugh who had suggested that we kind of mimic the Phase 1 hearing process to make sure that the applicants had a list of what those would be and would be prepared to respond to them at that time. Because this could get muddied if, again, they present a few things that would be somewhere along the spectrum towards a material change, perhaps, in that very public forum.
I did suggest the pre-hearing conference with those questions, and frankly, I had more in mind explaining ambiguities.
Right.
And,
Absolutely.
and community concerns and the like, rather than enhancements.
But their response to that
I hear
concern
you.
could be
I
an
hear you.
enhancement,
I
is
hear
all
you.
I'm
I
thinking.
hear
Yeah, but I think that's exactly what we're dealing with, That's the question. I mean, what you're talking about is a medium of getting enhancements to the table, which I don't think is the question. The question is, are we going to permit that in any medium?
Right.
I mean, the case about the left-hand turn lane, to go to a host community meeting where there's a problem access point and say to the applicant, how do you think traffic is going to get from there to there? They can say, within the four corners of their application, we looked at this, we think it's enough, it's not 2,000 cars, it's only 200 cars, or there's that back road you didn't notice or whatever. But they don't get to say, you're right, we forgot that, we're going to add a new left-hand turn lane. They can explain their position, they can clarify it, they can argue in favor of it, but they can't change it.
As a means to improve their application, but they may change it later, which goes to the place that we started half an hour ago, which is what happens as the design evolves after the license is awarded, which we can take up later.
Yeah, that's just a
That's
different situation.
question, but I do
Right.
think it's an opportunity to appear to improve the application, and whether that's.
But there's one before, I mean, there's plenty of ones. I think we have a consensus that there's no problem, once you've made the decision, you can negotiate with those folks, you can add things. What we're talking about is pre-license decision. So let's see where we are on this point. So are we, do we agree or not that we want to limit the features in the application that we can evaluate to those features which are actually in the application, with the only modification of that being possibly regulatorily enforced changes and changes which come at the license negotiation phase?
I'm in favor of that, but I'm not sure that I'm in favor entirely of your coda, which I think it is, that at a host community meeting, we say, how do you think the people are going to turn left? And they say, oh my God, we forgot the left-hand turn, and we'll have to fix that. That doesn't change the application.
Correct.
But it is something we can listen to and think about as a condition for negotiation once we make the award.
True, yes, and I mean, and that's a real subtlety, but I think it's legit. I mean, we would have to say to ourselves, we like that on balance, we like that applicant best.
Right,
And we hope they can fix that problem.
right,
Right.
right. And with that, then I am in favor of that hard and fast.
I'm going to see our general counsel write this one up.
Are we missing, John, you get all these questions offline. Are we missing anything in this conversation?
I was just wondering if you actually want to hear publicly on these issues, not any specifics, but hear what our applicants have to say about it on a sort of a uniform basis. It might be instructive. As long as we say to them, please don't include your specific improvements that you want to add in
Right.
your response to the.
Leave it at this generic, abstract level that we've been talking about.
You know, I'm wrestling a little bit because, you know, I think this left turn example is it's a very good case in point because it's also very site specific. When we say to somebody, no, you cannot make a left turn improvement here because others would be at a disadvantage, I don't think it really applies because the others don't have that site. I think it begins to tell how prepared they were in an application. And I think when we add all of those instances, that and however many more, I think that's very much an important consideration. You know, when it comes to making the final judgment. This was a buttoned up, you know, versus this one had all these questions. But I think that having a rigid, and I appreciate the way you characterized the chairman position, having a very hard, you know, nothing is a little too limiting, and I understand that we have still the right, you know, of our regulation to wait and see a particular instance. But I'm not prepared to say you are locked between the submission of the application and the award because there is enough time in between, including some of those answers to the subtleties or clarification questions that could start to add up in the venue of either improving or clarifying the application.
And there's such a fine line, Commissioner,
It's
to
a
your
fine
question.
line.
And I'll use an example of one that I may or may not have heard. So, but for example, say a particular applicant says, well, when we were doing our initial projections for the purposes of the application, we perhaps didn't see something. And now when we review our estimate of revenues, our revenues are actually far in excess of what they currently are. We are going to rely on our advisors to review all of the revenue forecasts of each one of the different applicants. But potentially some of the assumptions that they're using, they might miss it because they aren't reacting to something that is in front of them. So we could otherwise be making an award to one particular applicant based on our idea of revenues that in actuality, there's information out there that the revenues are going to be greater than that. So there is some risk, and there's such a fine line of clarifying, improving, and I agree with the sentiments that have been, for fairness reasons, it's very difficult to try to make that distinction. But there are policy arguments on the other side that in order to make the best decision, you might need the best information in front of you.
This almost gets metaphysical, because I don't disagree with that. And another example would be that the applicant looks at a traffic study and says, that's a better traffic study than mine, and I got to do something about that interchange.
Right.
Right? So it is something one can listen to, but it seems to me that the time for and understand that that's a possibility for this, but the time for really inserting it into the application in the way you're overall judging the application is at the end, when the other factors lead you to want to award the license to that person, and then we get the staff to negotiate with them. I mean, that sort of is, you've got a list, you've got a list of things that need improvement, including the things that we've already found are insufficient. And we know that some stuff is possible. We know that the applicant isn't going to do some things. And so at the end, you make the award and instruct the people to negotiate and the staff to negotiate and put that into the license conditions.
And just to,
Does that,
I'm fine with that. I think, we are getting close to metaphysical, but I, as long as we're not constraining ourselves, I think, we already have the regulation that allows us the flexibility. I know what the general principle is here. You don't get just to do a do-over because you have the benefit of hindsight or the benefit of others. However, there's site-specific issues that could and should be, we should be listened to, and if we can say, put that on hold, we'll take it up at the point of award, if you get awarded the license, but we're only looking at it, at what you presented, I'm fine with that.
Right.
As long as we don't lose sight of the fact that
Right.
something could and legitimately be improved after the fact.
Now,
we're maintaining flexibility without opening the,
A can of worms.
opening a can of worms for,
doesn't the, for the evaluation process, and part of what we've considered, it seems like what we're really talking about, we're talking about the information supplied by the applicant in the application, talking about the clarifications requested by the teams, and the responses to commission questions at the host community agreement.
Right.
For the evaluation process, it seems like those are the application, clarifications, and the responses to commission questions at the host community hearing, all of which are really started by the commission. The application, and if the commission asks it, then it's part of it. If the commission's not solicited that answer, then it would not be.
certainly the clarifications that came in, because that's in the that stuff that's in the application is just hard to figure out what it means. And
But it's easy to suggest that some of the answers we might get at the host community hearings are, one, not only going to lend themselves to our evaluative process, but they could lend ourselves to the end stage process as well.
to the what?
You could wind up asking questions at the host community hearing, which are going to lend itself to a better evaluation of the application, and they also may lead you to that checklist of items that you use at the end of the selection process as well.
And the commission could use it somewhere else.
Right.
But that would at least keep a,
But again,
Fence around.
it's all under an umbrella of commission-initiated requests as opposed to an onslaught coming our direction.
Yeah, and the reason that I think that the discussion isn't entirely metaphysical is that we're dealing with sophisticated people. And you can ask a question at one of those.
Our
host commu-
applicants, not us. Our applicants,
No,
not us.
both.
At least some of us.
Talking myself
You-
out of
Eastern
dry.
Mass
You
one.
could-
Yeah, Eastern Mass one.
Sorry.
No. See what happens at these long meetings.
Right.
You can ask a question at that host community meeting and have a long answer that brings in a lot of supporting stuff that is, in the last analysis, nothing more, nothing less than an enhancement that wasn't sought. And so I think that to say that whatever we get in response to the host community hearing questions we ask is something we consider as part of the application, I think that distinction between things we'll think about and things that are part of the application does make a difference. And we file it away, but just because it was said there, it's not part of the application. I think. Does that make sense? Sort of?
Got that?
Does that include the initial 90-minute presentations as well?
The initial 90-minute presentations, if they're in the application, they're in the application. If they're not, they're not.
Right.
I do think, maybe this was spoken to, that the idea of having people who are watching and listening, comment, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing.
I would
what
too.
people have to say.
I would too.
And I
I'm
think-
not sure I'd like to have a hearing on that. but
No,
certainly
Written
written
comments.
comments, I think
Right.
would be really good.
Yeah.
And that fits within, the Pink and Co. folks have been taking a look at how conditions should work, what conditions we should include
Right.
within the overall license.
Right.
And, I've been approached that different jurisdictions do it in different ways.
Right.
And that is but part of the same question, so potentially people could opine on that as well.
Right.
All right, we had a third case, which you brought up. Did you really mean to put that one on the table? It's in the HCA, but not in the application? Is that what you were?
That was the third one.
That is a third situation.
That would be pretty hard to do, wouldn't it, since the HCA's are all incorporated into the applications?
I think if we were to take that position, we actually never thought about it, but if we were to take the position that everything that's in the HCA is incorporated into the application, whether it shows up physically or not,
It's
then,
attached.
yeah, then we would assume that that was a requirement.
Seems-
And we would evaluate it based upon how they address that requirement. So we could do that. That would work.
Seems to me that, yeah.
Right. The HCA and the surrounding community agreements are attached.
That's part of the
Seems to be
application,
one
so
exists.
that's in the
That
application,
is-
as far as I'm
I
concerned.
think in that instance, we would be in the realm of what I was alluding to before. It may be in the HCA, but if we don't see it in the budget, you know,
Well, that's a clarification
it's
problem, right?
it's an important
No
clarification.
question, absolutely, yeah, right,
And we will hope that you have
Right.
better correct that, for example.
right. Okay.
Yeah, it has an additional question.
Yes.
And the regulations for this question are in Section 5C of your materials.
This is a question that came up in the finance section. And that is relative to the calculation of the minimum capital investment, which I have included here in the packets. There's perhaps the 205 CMR 12203 is a better starting point. And I'm particularly referring to at least one applicant of the category 2 that we have before us has included the fit out of temporary space and eventual demolition of space, of that space. And those costs can be generally identified in their budget. The question from our consultants was, does that count towards the minimum capital investment? It is an issue if the rest of the costs do not amount to 125 million, which is the minimum capital investment. And I am not exactly sure where that would leave this applicant. Does kind of close. So it may be a moot point, but just in case it is not, I wanted to bring that up because because that was not anticipated in this regulation necessarily. I can speak to the particular sections if you have questions, but we talk about, on the one hand, we talk about demolition costs in item number 2, but we don't talk about temporary space necessarily, or the fit out of temporary space, or the demolition of temporary space. The general thrust of the capital investment, in my view, but this is only my view, was having to do with permanency, something that would be long-lasting. That's not really reflected in any one of these sections, but that's where the conundrum, if you will, comes in.
So give us an example. Give us a hypothetical case of something that would take place where you're not sure whether we should count it or not.
Building something and demolishing it.
So
6 months,
building a
building
temporary
something, a temporary facility,
and then demolishing it at some point down the road.
6 months later,
Or outfitting a temporary facility.
outfitting a
and
temporary facility,
not-
and then
demolish
doing
it.
away with that space by demolishing it. All those costs are construction costs, which are part of, have design costs, which are all part of what could be included, but are not permanent, are by nature temporary.
So it would be improving the infrastructure that's already there rather than building something new, correct?
In one instance, yes. And demolishing that space later, thus making it a temporary facility.
But not but, the temporary facility would have the effect of helping the revenue stream come online earlier.
Fundamentally,
And that would be the reason for doing it. So it would be a capital investment that would yield revenue to the Commonwealth,
it would be. It has
As
an
well as
immediate.
jobs.
as well as
As well as
jobs.
jobs, right. Right.
And it might mean that if two applicants committed an equal capital investment, but one had one of these temporary buildings, that the permanent building would not be as elegant
Precisely.
as the other.
And in that scenario, we would be then evaluating a short-term benefit because of the earlier revenue with a long-term benefit because of the long-lasting structure.
Right.
And we could use a discount rate and make those be the same or equivalent, or debate about what that discount rate must be, but that's really not the point here.
But spending less money on a structure doesn't necessarily mean it won't last as long. It may mean it's not as elegant, but I don't know that you could say that it wouldn't last as long.
But
Yeah,
not as-
I'm not talking about what remains, I'm talking about the one that's gone. Because it's temporary in nature, whatever you spent there is now gone, it's not permanent. If you take the viewpoint that the whole point of the capital investment was to have a long-lasting structure,
High quality, long-lasting structure.
right? Well, both, there's high quality and there's long-lasting.
Right.
The
You could
point is,
also- That's really interesting. You could also take the position that the reason for the capital investment was to produce income and jobs.
precisely, yeah.
Yeah.
And, you know, I frankly could go either way.
Right.
I mean, I'm the one that debated this first, I guess, with myself when it was first highlighted by our consultants, and decided to really bring it up because after reading the regulation that Todd and I drafted, we really never anticipated that.
Right.
And are the costs excluded? Is that our doing, or is that the legislature?
No, it's our doing. It's our clarification of what's in the legislation. There's a general guideline. There's specific language in the Category 2 from the statute that says that infrastructure improvements outside of the property, especially as it relates to roadways, will not be part of the capital investment. And we took that general guideline and extrapolated that to a lot of costs. And we had many discussions, you'll remember, about investment outside of property confines.
Right.
But we also, there's also the very general language in the legislation as to we get to determine, and we did, by virtue of this regulation, what constitutes the capital investment or the minimum capital investment.
Well, I'll take a crack at it. I mean, I as we remember those conversations, I never was very comfortable with the idea of leaving stuff out. I never could understand the distinction between inside the site and outside the site. That just never made sense to me. And I guess I lean the same way here, that I wouldn't see precluding that. We may not want to permit a temporary facility for whatever our own reasons are. But I think that's where we should determine whether we like the idea of having a temporary facility or not, rather than by doing it sort of through the back door by saying you can't count that towards your capital expense. So I would, for what it's worth, my instinct would be to say we should not exclude it, and period. Incidentally, we'll deal with temporary facilities in another context.
Right. Or we will lay the temporary facility applicant alongside the permanent facility applicant and choose the permanent facility.
Right.
I mean,
Right.
but that's saying the same thing. I think that's the way to go, too.
I just missed your last point. You put them side by side and choose one over the other, is that what
Yeah, it would be a key
So you-
differentiator between applications, not a prerequisite of meeting the minimum capital investment. Is that a fair statement? Is that your point?
if we decided to permit the temporary,
Right.
then you'd be looking at a temporary versus without a temporary, and you get to pick which one you prefer. We might say we don't permit temporaries, so they're all off the table, but we haven't crossed that bridge yet.
When do we intend to cross that bridge? Because I think we're evaluating that now. What are the numbers? Because you can open a facility within 6 months, or 12 months, or 18 months, that's all part of our evaluation process going on right now.
It is, that's right.
So if we're going to consider saying no, I would think we'd have to have that discussion soon, because our evaluation is based on those numbers.
And I would actually go further and say, how could we say no to a temporary
I
facility
agree.
that we're going to allow and count towards the minimum capital investment?
Well, if we said no to temporary facilities, then the allowance toward its capital investment becomes moot.
Becomes
It
moot,
just, I mean, it's either or.
And I think there's a very big difference between a temporary facility that someone builds haphazardly and an existing facility that someone upgrades. So I just,
Yeah, I haven't thought, I think we're pretty late in the game
I
to
do
say
too.
that we're not gonna consider temporary facilities. We haven't said, we didn't say that before.
correct.
We've got at least
Isn't
one.
there,
that's-
there's something in the statute about temporary facilities, right? What is that?
There is,
There is a, it's not a temporary facility, it's not the term of art, I don't think.
There's a phasing
Early
plan.
opening, there's-
Phase.
You can
There's language
phase-
to a phasing plan.
Yes, you can have a phasing plan. It's not technically a temporary facility, but the commission could
Phase.
decide to allow a project to be
Phasing.
built in phases.
Right, okay.
and we have to approve
The phasing plan.
the phase one thing and issue some kind of a certificate before it can open.
Yes. Yes.
So what
that's
we're
right.
saying relative to, what you're sort of suggesting, I think, relative to, at least to category 2 is, as a practical matter, it's too late to say we're not going to
I think
consider them.
so.
So we'll just weigh them pro or con as
Correct.
part of an application versus
And
other
it may be you
applications.
spent less money, but then you bring in revenue sooner.
Right,
Maybe
right,
that's
right.
a weighting
Okay,
mechanism.
I'm fine with that.
Right,
Oh, that is a weighting mechanism. There's a way to quantify that.
Yeah.
right,
You
right.
can just have to pick the discount rate.
So the bottom line is, we will not preclude those costs from the
Minimum capital.
capitalization. And we will consider them as part of the application as one fair way to go. Okay, it's 8:15 at night. What have you got?
I've got one more really quick thing.
All right.
I don't know, am I up next?
That's we have the, if we're done with the question, I have the critical path check-in, but I know we've been trying to get to the evaluation questions for the category 1 application, so I suggest.
Yeah, that's fine. No, I'm being facetious. I mean, we're here for a reason. These are important, so.
Be good to take a little time on this. I think, as you know, all of you know, there are some recommended changes to RFA 2 for the Category 1 application, and you'll see in your packet two things. One is a spreadsheet and a PowerPoint. They're identical content, just different format, partly because if this were going to be before a large audience, I thought it might be useful to have the PowerPoint visible. Do you have this also?
I don't think we have the PowerPoint.
No, we just have
Then I'll refer you to, well, let me start off by saying this, that the changes that we're recommending, I think, fall into 3 categories. They're to clarify the intent of the question, or to request new information that is related to that question. Number 2, to obtain data in a standard format to facilitate our collective review and comparisons. And the last one is to obtain sufficient information to assess the applicant's response and approach. And what we have before you today are about 6 questions that I would propose need some of your input because they may touch on policy. I think the latter 2 categories, which are just requesting information in a standard format, are things that we've already actually, in some cases, asked the applicants for, which are job creation templates and revenue and expense, income and expense templates. So there are a few.
Before you get to that, could I just ask a
Sure.
question about this format? Are the proposed, in some cases, it looks to me like the proposed revisions are substitutions for the existing questions, and in some cases, they are additions. Is my reading correct, or are they
Yeah.
all?
Mostly they're additions. They're not substitutions. There's no place where we are saying, don't ask this question, ask it completely differently.
Okay.
Okay?
Then the second thing is that there are some of the additions as to which I would like to offer comments, but I don't think they're of a material nature that needs to occupy us today. Is there
I
time
agree.
to do that?
I agree.
Okay.
And so that's why, if you look up here, go down one more slide, please, Artem, here. There's 6 or so categories that I think are before you today for discussion that we'd like to get your input on. I think the rest, and there are about 35 questions at all, or in total, that most of which are just slight revisions or requesting information in a particular manner. And these are 1.9, which is post-licensing. In the WOW group, it was notable that none of the applicants had addressed, for example, internet gaming. So and if you'll go down one slide, please, Artem, we're proposing that the RFA2 make it quite clear that the Commission would like the applicants' views and expectations of how the Commonwealth would handle internet gaming and other issues of potential competition for your facility.
Why, I think we need to tease that out, but why wouldn't it go better in question 1.4, which talks about how are you going to handle competition? Or maybe both places. But, and the in particular part, it strikes me, is a limitation. That's my only 2 cents worth.
You mean drop the words in particular?
Yeah.
We can do that.
Including, and put including or
Fine,
something,
yeah.
so it didn't look like we were focusing exclusively on that, because there may be a lot of other things they want us to do.
We can do
The
that.
competitive environment, it could fit either place.
It could fit either
I don't-
place.
I don't think-
I
And
do-
maybe both.
I understand now that question 1.9 was intended to try to get the applicants to
Right.
address that,
That was my.
but they didn't.
That was what I was looking for.
Way back when, so,
Right.
before we were on, so that's why it's there.
Okay.
Okay, so that's, I think, pretty straightforward. The next one is got to do with schematic design. We had, question 4.5 requests schematic design as defined and understood by the AIA, which I think we all agree is a sketchy definition. The proposed revision is to ask them for a basis of design, which is a narrative that includes at a minimum these following items: a discussion of the design intent, major site and building features, proposed exterior and interior materials, tabular program allocation, including space types and proposed square footage, phasing, and an approach to sustainability. So it's a narrative that talks about what they're proposing to do. I believe we've gotten kind of chock-a-block information in category 4. And so this is intended to give the reviewers a bigger picture sense of what it is they're proposing to do, which I think will actually help that discussion we had a little bit earlier, because if the picture is not detailed enough to give you the basis of design, then we're trying to determine if something has been changed. We may not have the starting point. So it could help. So in my mind, I put this question up because I wanted to make sure you're clear. Do I really think it's a policy issue? Not really. It's really borderline. But we think that particularly Team 4 thinks this would be of a benefit.
No, I think it would be a benefit. I just wonder if 250 words is enough.
I agree. I just caught that.
Jennifer was already crossing that out.
I was like, hey, we can't do that. Especially because if you look at the bottom
Right,
of this
right,
box, we also want a basis of design for the MEP.
Right,
That could also be 250
Right.
words, so we'll modify that.
okay.
Because it's definitely too skimpy. Question 4.9 is about transportation infrastructure. And I think for the casino resorts, this would be a very important question to also ask them for a regional plan showing features and locations of other attractions that the proposer is relating to or collaborating with, including transportation facilities within a 1 mile of site. And then also a site plan to illustrate the movement of pedestrian and vehicular traffic. So this is just a little bit more information, it's a little bit new, to get some better information.
Right. Jennifer, could I?
Sure.
Why the 1 mile? I'm curious. Is that deemed to be the walkable?
I think it was partly walkable. Nancy, do you have a sense why we were just a
Primarily thinking of that, I think.
we can also, I think, actually, now that we think about it, depending on where the category 1, that might be too narrow a range.
Yeah, if you
Because they
have,
could add shuttles or
Yeah.
something.
if you have
to it.
shuttle buses or,
So let's increase that to 5.
We'll check it with our transportation consultants, but I propose.
More
something
than
more
one.
than 5.
Probably
enough.
not more than 5,
Right.
because then we start in, for
We'll get 'em to
example,
give us a number.
an urban one could be just so complicated visually and information-wise, it wouldn't be useful.
fair enough.
Something came up, as Jennifer knows, in our meeting last week, or this week, whatever it was, about whether or not these plans were compatible with the host community's master plans. And apparently every community is supposed to have a master plan. And this one person in our group, who was a little obsessive on this point, but kept saying if they haven't dealt with this, with the community's master plan, they're subject to legal problems, and have they? And I said I really didn't know I didn't know anything about that. But two things. One, is there any place in our process where we do check for compatibility with master plan, one? And two, do we need to add anything more about this? Particularly, John, you might have some sense of this. Is there anything significant about a host community, about a development being compatible with the parameters laid out in a master plan that we need to be attentive to?
Well, I think that not all applicants obviously will be through the entire planning process at the local level at the end of our application process. It's anticipated that there'll be significant approvals over the next couple of years. So to the degree that, I'm not tremendously, I have a vague memory of the master plan requirement, but to the degree that we're just requiring our consistency with zoning, there'll still be numerous other local approvals that'll be necessary over the permitting timeline.
Yeah. As they go through the zoning process, that issue will be flushed out.
Is zoning the principal tool for managing the master plan?
It will get raised there. There are some communities who don't update their master plan as often perhaps, but as they go through the zoning process, they will have to show that they're compatible with the use that parcel is encompassed in. And the master plan issue should come up there. So I think John is right. As they go through the process, that plan will get raised and flagged.
And is there enough substance there that it's something that we, at least going forward, is it something that we should have in our parameters somewhere and demonstrate compatibility with the master plan, or does that seem unnecessary?
I think because we've asked for permits, that they have to get all appropriate permits and approvals, I think we're covered in terms of that issue.
I would agree, and I remember also the presentation from the MIPA principal talking about how each one of these projects was de facto going to necessitate an environmental impact review, so a MIPA process.
Yeah.
So it's almost a foregone
I'm fine
conclusion
with-
that
I'm
they
fine
will
with
have to
that.
go through it.
Just- yeah. Okay.
Next one, could you go down a couple more? We've got something out of order. One more, and one more after that. Was questions 471 to 475 have to do with environmental permitting and EEA certificates, EIR certificates, assessments, findings, and impacts. And your Ombudsman, John Ziemba, suggested, I believe, that it would be good to ask them, the applicants, to provide a summary of any changes to their project from the date of their last environmental certificate
Yeah, and I think what that is sort of significant and material changes rather than just any changes. And what we're hoping to achieve here is that we don't force our sister agencies at Environmental Affairs and Transportation to have to try to call it out themselves, that it's provided an easier format for them when they're reviewing the applications versus the last time that they opined on them during the review process. So it'd be a help. Many of these applicants have very ongoing relationships with DOT, for example, so DOT is pretty familiar with whatever changes they've made since the last one, but it would help.
And those conversations are ongoing. There's meeting after meeting after meeting, whereas we've got a point in time when we get the application.
Right.
I
But it'd
think
speed
this-
up the application review by the other agencies, too.
Correct.
Yes. Because they don't know whether they're looking at
Right.
something they haven't seen or they saw
Right.
it 2 revisions ago.
Right.
So that's that one. Then the next 2 are some, one is 5.28, a code of ethics, where the question is not to just provide the code of ethics, but to also describe the process by which it was promulgated and a policy to assure adherence.
Okay.
And that was Mark Vanderlinden's recommendation that we add that. And the last question is 5.9, which is the metrics for problem gambling. And he requested that we separate this question, which has to do with the metrics the applicant will use to measure whether it's succeeding in its efforts to reduce gambling. I think this is problem gambling and its gambling and its gaming establishment by those with gambling-related problems. We want to separate this into 2 areas of inquiry, one regarding past efforts and another for future efforts. And those are, and then all the rest of the questions, which are on this stick and in front of me, are things that really are, we've asked, for example, for the total investment outside the property. And the question was, originally show the total investment in the infrastructure outside the property boundaries. And it would be preferable to get it broken out by these traditional categories of work: water, sewer, local roads, state roads, traffic signalization, and on and on. And all the rest of these questions, I would suggest, if you want to look through them, are requesting data in a different format or more consistent, or I think a lot of times they've answered exactly what you asked for, but they didn't really scratch the surface. Whether they,
No, I think they're great.
Right.
I'm glad we're doing this.
I think it'd be very
I've
useful.
got some,
It's mostly to make the reviews go more quickly,
Right.
I've got some
reviewers have
edits,
had
which
to
I'll
hunt
give you
for things.
on my first introduction, but I'll give that to you after.
Okay,
this.
that would be great. So you'll see everything's here. A lot of it is calculating things differently or breaking it out.
Right.
And I believe every one of the commissioners who has seen all of these changes from each of your teams.
Yes. We need to move fairly quickly on this, don't we, so that
Yeah.
they may be filling out their
We do, I think.
Phase 2 applications now.
John and Todd and I will talk about how best to disseminate the information. We probably should get it directly to our Category 1s and then post it on the website, that these are it's sort of an addendum with rephrased questions, so we'll
And
look
we'll
at
work
it.
with you to make sure the question's clear,
Yeah.
Right.
so that we're not making an unclear question less unclear.
And it may make sense, although I know they've come in for the initial pre-application, but certainly to invite them in to sort of talk that through, particularly if they bring kind of the right people to the meeting in terms of, understanding that
Category
data.
1.
Yeah, for the Category 1 applicants, and, we'd be happy to help you with that. I think, they don't always read instructions as clearly as we'd like them to, and I think face-to-face is a good way to convey some of it.
Right. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, do you want me to touch on
I do.
critical path a little bit?
Yep. Well, this is actually very important, so yes, by all means.
Well, I will just start at the beginning and see if we want to go on past that, but I think there's one important point, and if Artem gets the if you could refer to, I think if you have it in your packet, it's the chart, basically that has at the top of it has a series of
The summaries.
timelines right at the beginning of it.
Keep going.
And then it has the construction timelines right below it.
Right.
Yep. Got it.
You're all there? What I'd like to do is start just to ensure that I'm on the same page with the commission here with any new information we've had. At a previous meeting, the commission directed me to begin the process of planning and to do that based on a schedule that incorporated a possibility of an early opening of a facility. We had a little discussion about what that timeline would be, discussion was around 7 months, 10 months, something like that, or 6 months, 10 months, something in that area. We went back, I did start, and that's what this reflects, is a schedule based on a facility that would open in 6 months. So it's incorporated, if you look at this particular version of the construction cost, the green line, you will see a new marks about 710 right in the middle. If the award's on 110, 6 months out would be about 710, and from there we've extended that line down through the rest of this chart, and we can go on through to take a look at that, or we could hold off depending on this initial discussion. But what I thought was important is based on new information, I think, that either has come into the commission or information that we've all had over the process, is to reemphasize where I was in the initial planning. The initial planning, if you look at it, had projected for slots parlor about 11 months till, and we're trying to key on the construction complete, because that's really then has a process that would go in place, yet to be defined, that would be a pre-opening cycle to get basically their compliance staff, equipment, everything ready to go for public operation. So that actual construction is important. It is a little bit different in the slot parlors as opposed to the resorts, because in the resort, it's pretty clear that the casino construction has to be complete, and then there are some other provisions before there could be opening that have to take place as well. So the timing, the basic timing, was looking at about 11 months for the construction, is the shortest time for the construction of a slot parlor. Part of that relates to information collected, I think, in this process, is I was able to identify probably 10 months as the shortest one, at least in my brief survey that was apparent. But also we had our other applicants have described the process in their public presentation around 18 months. So that's why I wanted to check back in to see where the commission is on that factor. We also has taken in the category 1 applications, projected about a 24 to 27 month construction completion for the casino in those two cases. I think this is fairly consistent. 24 months is something looked like to me that was fairly common. Obviously, when it's a resort, it's the rest of the infrastructure, and those things are liable to take some months longer. But 24, 27 months is fairly consistent relative to other examples that we've seen around the country for casino construction. So that part of I think the big question really comes down to me checking back in with the commissioners, because as we move forward with an advanced schedule, what we also do is move forward with we incur costs much faster than we would be if we were doing more of a year's schedule out, and it can, particularly if you think in the way of regulatory costs, we would have to have staff, start training staff fairly quickly, have them hired, ready to go, and in place so they could monitor this slots parlor that might be operational in July, as opposed to planning for something pretty close to the end of the year. So I wanted to just check back in with the commission, gauge how you were thinking, if you wanted me to continue with this shorter planning period, or maybe go back to a process that incorporates something more like 11, 12 months, which is still ahead of most of the proposals and most of the construction I've seen, a little ahead of or equal to, but is longer than a 7-month or a 6-month concept.
I don't think we can make the decision to go longer since we are evaluating now one applicant that says they can do it in 6 months, and part of that evaluation are revenues that will be generated early. So I don't think we can say, let's make it 11 months, because that will throw their whole application. It would not be, we couldn't evaluate it the same way. So
Well, the thing we're wrestling with, and we've been wrestling with this now, and this is a hard one, but as you know, I took a very hard line myself, saying at one point, if they say they can start, we've got to be ready for that, because we can't be in a position of not being ready. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. There's a couple of things that have come to our attention. One is that will force us to get ready to do stuff. There's two things. It'll force us to get ready to do stuff quickly, and it's going to force us into some spending decisions which are going to be somewhat inefficient, because we're rushing to get ready for July. Let me just finish. But the other thing that continues to surface is incredulity from anybody that 6 months is really doable. So if we are, we put ourselves upside down and sideways to try to accommodate a schedule, which as we check around other jurisdictions in every place, we hear it's not viable. So even I, who started out taking a very strong position, are saying, boy, to ramrod through our systems the ability to accommodate 6 months when that's only one of 3 applicants is claiming it, so there's a 33% chance maybe that it would happen, number one, and number two, most people are telling us they don't think that's viable anyway. So that's where I'm troubled.
well,
And I want to speak to that, because the 6 months that are included in that notion, which I believe to be aggressive, includes, if I'm not mistaken, 2 months for permitting and 4 for construction. And the permitting, as we will soon see in a lot more detail, with everything that goes in terms of traffic and on host and surrounding communities, just to name one, in my experience is that tends to take a lot longer than 2 months. So I genuinely believe that that's an aggressive notion. I could be surprised. Now, after the 2 months, there's a very aggressive build-out period as well of 4 months. So we need to break that down a little bit. And we now, having said that, I have not been in the building and site design or mitigation, which I know some of our consultants and colleagues are getting a lot more into the weeds, but that's the genesis of that notion.
I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, I mean, I'm hearing mixed opinions on that, and I think we are doing a disservice if we're just going to say we don't think you can do it, so we're not going to be ready. And when we say we're going to be ready, I think it's important to maybe have that aggressive timeline, and then we'll know in January where we really are, and then it would mean a complete ramp, but then we could adjust accordingly. But for us to right now say, let's make it 11 months, I think is doing a real disservice to one of the 3 applicants. I mean, it really, it throws their, what they consider their, yes, and that would be on us. And I just wouldn't want to be in that position where it's on us to say, hey, we're not ready. Again, I understand, and I know all what you're saying as far as what that means projection-wise, number-wise, but it's not like we get to the 6-month period and say, oh, we're ready, and they're not. We will know in January what the status is and the direction we're going in. And
Well-
maybe if we have to make an adjustment, then we will.
I think that the complicating factor here is just what we mean by being ready. Because there are ways to be ready for one eventuality and another to build the agency and systems, assuming that will happen. There's paper systems that could work temporarily, just like a temporary facility could work for an applicant. And there's, electronic systems that could work for us permanently, just like a permanent facility will work. So when we assume that, we have to be permanent ready for the earliest, that has significant impacts into our cash flow, for one, which is where we're coming from, if we assume that we have to be permanent ready. And that's a complicating factor here.
That's what I was going to raise. It doesn't strike me that this is an on-off switch. For example, I saw on one of the charts, maybe it was the people who were going to need seats, how many seats we were going to need for the licensing system, and that was 75 or something. Ultimately, it doesn't strike me that we're going to need anything near 75 to get the slots parlor up and running. And we have to be ready for the construction licenses and registrations fairly early after the license is awarded, but we don't have to have the floor personnel trained for a while after that. So it seems to me we can hedge our, there's some ways to hedge our bets a little bit, and or am I not right?
Well, I think, it's always a trade-off and it's a bit of an art, but, to the extent that we can rely on temporary costs, for example, by necessity. I mean, a great case in point is a lab or the use of consultants versus hiring permanent employees. I am generally of the view that our mix and use of consultants should flip. We by necessity had to rely on consultants too much, I would venture initially, because we had almost no staff, and that relationship eventually has to flip. But it doesn't have to flip entirely, let's say, because we're looking at something 6 months from now. The same is true for the systems that we have or that we build. Do we have to have the licensing system and the document management system on which the licensing system is built on be, casino ready, let alone slots parlor ready? If we can, the answer is not as straightforward, unfortunately.
Let me take a shot at this one, because I think we have to, what we and I in particular have been guilty of is putting tremendous mixed message pressure on our team here. And the real world is, you have only to look at the Affordable Care Act, but it's every installation of everything is really hard, takes longer than you think it's going to take. And we want to be smart managers here. We need to give our director and his staff some kind of a clear presumption under which they can operate. Originally, my position was, let's go with the presumption that we're going to have to be ready to do a high-quality job in the middle of July. If it turns out we get wind later on, that we don't need to do that, it's going to be quite a bit later, we can adapt at that point. I think I've come to the reverse position because we're going to go through a hell of a process trying to get ready for this. And if we have to do it in short order, we'll figure out a way to do it in short order. But I think my view at this point would be to change that. I think my presumption would be to say, let's pick a number. If it's 11 months, that seems, but for this one oddball circumstance, if 11 months is a good solid number and it's one we think we can do, and our CIO and our CFAO, who've only been with us for 3 weeks, can buy into it and feel like they can do it, and we can do it without killing ourselves, without too high risk of error and failure. Let's make that the presumption. And if come mid-January, something strange happens, and it means we've got to figure out a way to deal with something in July or August or September, then we turn our attention to what's a short-term fix. Maybe it'll be inefficient, it'll cost us, some money we wouldn't have had to spend otherwise. But that's an unlikely outcome. Statistically, it's an unlikely outcome. And if it happens, we figure out how to deal with it. But we give our people the chance now to get ready to do this right, do this properly.
I think statements like it's an unlikely outcome is, we're looking at a one of three possibility chances. So I don't,
It's one of three if we have our surrounding community agreements done in time. There's lots of other,
There's lots of other things
lots
too.
of other variables that can go wrong here. But I'm
even
not
that-
prejudicing against them. Let's say it's one in
well,
three.
that's what
No, I'm not prejudiced, I'm not, I don't have any, but Raynham is a 1 in 3 chance of getting, let's put it that way, so there's a 1 in 3 chance. So we're weighing 2 against 1. And given everything else, given how much we have to go through, I think discretion would be the better part of valor here. And I think I'd rather have the inefficiencies forced on us in middle of January to try to figure out how do we accommodate this circumstance, rather than force us inefficiencies through our entire growth process at this really critical juncture where we're trying to get ourselves organized with all these critical initial steps.
I would think it's much harder to plan, like you have this amount of time, and then say, oh no, now you have this amount. But the opposite is much easier to plan for, kind of full steam ahead, and then, whoa, okay, it's not that long from now that we'll know. And then it's, I think, easier to say, okay, let's be more thoughtful about this.
That's what I've been saying. I totally get it. In many cases, I would agree with that. And let's hear what other people think, and let's also hear what you think, Rick. I mean,
Yeah,
it's going to weigh heavily on you and Derek and John in particular, and David.
Well, I mean, part of what I need to do is, I don't want to leave the commission with the thought that your staff is looking at the expenses and how they can be spread out. I think even when I've been talking, I've been trying to talk about going forward with the regulations and the phased process, trying to anticipate when the casinos are going to be open. So definitely that's the backbone of the planning process, is trying to guess as best as possible when we may have to be online and phase it and actually commit to our costs as we move forward, whether they're in the field or whether they're computer problems. I think the hard part becomes when we, even if it's a number of licenses, even as we look at number of licenses for facilities, it really comes down to a lot. That's kind of how they're priced and sold. If you get a small amount of licenses, you actually end up paying, in some cases, I think as our projection, a higher fee than you would if you had the larger amount of licenses, because that's when the provider discounts them. So we took that into consideration as well. But I think an example that might be pretty clear is how we want to monitor and collect taxes. At least I think we've had discussions that we want to do that automated, that we don't want to do that through some kind of a manual process where we've got to have a fleet of auditors and we're going back and forth and checking those accounts and daily records. But if we're going to do that and we're going to be ready by July, we've got to start planning fairly quickly and most likely be able to start planning and having that equipment tested and in operation, obviously, by when these people come online, which is an extremely different situation than if we were looking at actually having that equipment purchased and online in the next fiscal year.
Well, what would you do? Take that example. What would you do if you made the decision to do it in the next fiscal year and it turned out we needed it in July? And we found that out in January. What would you do?
We would probably do what they currently do at the tracks, which is a paper-based, highly manual, and, process.
Well, in essence,
But that's currently what
we would
happens.
have to go to a manual process, and I think if the commission were to take a step to author, I mean, if that did happen, then we would have to pick up systems from there and go forward. If that took us some kind of a paper system, I guess we just have to come up with it, frankly.
Well, that's what I'm asking you. I mean,
Yeah.
you're in favor of extending it out. So, Commissioner Cameron's asking, making a really good point. So what do we do if all of a sudden we got to be ready in July? And it's a legitimate question, so.
It is a legitimate question, but I think that's, those larger systems planning, it's part of what I'm asking too, is there are costs to get involved in those kind of things sooner. And so it's part of my question is if we were gonna have it ready, I'd say we begin to assess and establish that kind of equipment and that kind of a system basically now.
Today, right.
And then we plan it, we get on consultants, and we have it ready to operate by July. So my solution would be we wouldn't get to that point. We would start it now, and we would be ready with a new monitoring system when we came online.
Is there any way to, I know how much you've got to do already, but is there any way to take an actual cost comparison of two options? For example, I understand that licenses, if we buy 100 licenses for one of these systems, the cost per license is X. If we buy 40 licenses, the cost per license will be X plus Y. Under ordinary circumstances, you'd say, we're ultimately going to need 100 licenses, let's pay X per license. That might not be the best solution given our cash flow, even though it's the most prudent overall fiscally. And that, it seems to me, is there may be other things that are like that. Using a paper system, how feasible is a paper system, and what's the cost of it if we have to use that temporarily? So that we could take a look at two different options and have some idea of what the cost was and what its impact on our overall cash flows.
And by the way, the paper system, I should clarify, does not have to be literally somebody writing
I understand that, I understand.
in
It
manus,
could be an Excel spreadsheet.
It could
You
be
can
Excel
use
spreadsheets,
you
it
can
could
use
be
a
scanned document, it could be
Right.
safeguarded. It would be a simple version of what we're building, but it doesn't have to be, the final automobile here that we will be, driving ultimately. I think that's an important distinction or options that we need to.
Yeah, and it
Consider.
just, I'm finding it hard to get my hands around this, a solution in the abstract without seeing a couple of things that show the order of magnitude difference, cost differential or time differential.
Well, the only thing I'd like to put with that is that you end up then creating two systems. I mean, essentially, if you're creating a manual system, which requires more labor, but your plan is to go to an automated system, at least to me, you're sort of paying for it twice. You're doing all this work to make sure you can track it manually, and at the same time, you want to go to this, you're also doing that for your licensees. Because from a licensee's perspective, if they're dealing with an automated system or they're dealing with a manual system, they're going to have to set up their operations differently. So I understand what we're talking about. We can try to come up with some cost comparisons. I'd almost prefer to go ahead with a more aggressive planning schedule and invest the time that way than because we did do some of that cost comparisons with the licensing software that we just went through.
And it's not, it's also not just dollars. I mean, this is one of these places where we got 5 cooks baking a cake, and this may be one place where a commission doesn't work very well. But I feel like a very experienced CEO, and I know a lot about starting things up, and we're pushing too hard. Could we do it? Yeah. Would it, over the long run, be more or less money? I don't know. To me, that's not really the issue. To me, the issue is being thoughtful, prudent, careful, doing this right, not breaking anybody's back, you know, just, we're pushing too hard. And I don't know what the percent likelihood is that we would have to accommodate something, but I lean now towards, you know, taking the prudent view. I think if you guys felt like you can do it, and the other thing that this gets us into is another whole issue, which is this cash flow issue, where Enrique and I have dramatically different senses of where we are at, and we're trying to work our way around this until we know a little bit more about where we're at. And I want very much not to screw up the design and implementation of our systems out of what I think is an exaggerated fear of a cash problem, but I'm only one commissioner, and another commissioner has a different view, and his is, you know, he's entitled to his as much as I am. So I'm trying to find a way to wend our way around all this and still give our director, you know, a direction which he and his team can operate under.
Two things. Director Day, first of all, you started this conversation around cash. And I think the chair is speaking about something different altogether, which is a sense that we're pushing too hard. In your opinion, were you suggesting a longer timeline just so that we could push costs to the next fiscal year? Or do you have the same concern that maybe we are pushing too hard? Which, I mean, the way you started this conversation was really based on fiscal issues. And maybe that's the point too, which is, I know in speaking to Derek, he believes there are some ways that we can, you know, ask for, you know, he knows the system, the state system, and there are ways we can manage that so that we will have what we need to move forward. So I think there are two different issues, and the first is really yours, which is, you know, my thought is I just want to be ready for any scenario, because not knowing at all which direction we're going. None of us know that. None of us know what the other teams are working on and, you know, where we are in this process. But just trying to be prepared for everything, I think, is really important. I think it's really important that we're not the ones that say, sorry, that's a great plan, but we're not ready for you. I think that's not a scenario I personally would like to be in.
But end up
I
with
don't
your
think
question,
anybody
which is a good question.
But my question to you was, the way I heard you today was, fiscally, it would be better if we could push this off 10 or 11 months. And I just wanted to know your thoughts on, then you said we could do it and you'd prefer to go the aggressive route if, in fact, we had to be ready.
I'd say, I might be accused of running away from the question, but I'm going to try anyways. Is actually, I would say both, because the cost issue is directly relevant because of incurring those costs in order to staff up, get the automation ready, get ready to actually go into operation on July 1st. The second question is as well is how fast we push. That is a problem in the long term, not just from possible mistakes. But of course, as we move forward, as the chairman noticed, we're going to be relying on other contractors to get things done.
Could you answer this question, Rick? I know this is hard, but if there weren't the concern about the money, you know, if that weren't really an issue, but we had a little bit of flexibility here about should be the most conservative case and target July, or be a little bit more risky as to whether we're ready or not and do, you know, 11 or 12 months out. Can you separate the two? What you know, do you think, independent of the money issue, can we do pretty well as good a job on balance to get ready by July as the end of the year?
I think I may have lost you. Can we do it?
If
We had all the money in the world.
Take away the money issue, you know, for the sake of discussion, and by putting as much money needed to do it and putting pedal to the metal and doing whatever, can we do the job right by July, or not? I mean, would you say, if we don't desperately have to, I think we're crazy to do July? I mean, you try to, you know, I'm getting a little bit of a sense to you that maybe I'm now exaggerating, that you don't particularly agree with what I said, which is that fundamentally we're pushing too hard. And I think Commissioner Cameron's question is really good. If what's really motivating you is concern about the cash flow, then we probably ought to be having that discussion, because I tried to change it, saying that's not, in my view, that's not really the central issue here.
I think we are pushing too hard to come up with that time period, that short of a time period in July with that expectation. I think if the money was not, so I'm not disagreeing at all that we are, I think we are pushing too hard. If the money, though, was not the issue, and we didn't kind of be going back and forth whether to go or not to go,
Right.
I think we could, probably not perfect, but I think we could come up with what we needed to do to go into business. But it will take more obedience with staff, and it'll take more obedience with moving forward in the right combination of
So
automation.
the cost of accommodating Commissioner Cameron's position is mostly money. You know, we're gonna be in pretty decent shape. It might be a little bit ragged, but we'll be fine. We can take pride in what we do come middle of July, if the money was not the problem.
Yes.
But I just thought you said that we are pushing too hard in terms of time, if we put the money aside.
I did say that I believe we're doing, yes, we are pushing too hard to meet that schedule. But the question is, can we do it, and can we have a good product? Yes, I think we can. Key to that would be the money. We've got to be able to get on the staff, the automation, to get ready to go. Did I?
That's fine.
My comments there, or my thoughts?
That's fine, because then we eventually have to introduce the money, and then, you know,
So,
I'll wait for that in a minute.
It's both more expensive in total outlay and more difficult on a cash flow sense to meet that July objective. Am I understanding what you're saying?
Could you try that one
It's
more?
both more expensive on a total cost basis, and ultimately, and more detrimental on a cash flow basis to meet the July target than it would be to stretch it out for 11 months.
Yes, I think it would be, because
All
I
right,
think if we had a
okay.
longer period, we
Right.
wouldn't, our contractors, those demands would not require us to invest so much time, so many hours immediately. We would spread that
Right.
over.
Right.
I think it would reduce the cost, the total cost.
Right. And we could take advantage of volume discounts.
Yes.
Okay.
So is it possible to say that we target the longer rollout as the optimum, but at the same time, we put together Plan B that shows how we're going to meet a July opening with paper and the like, if by January, February, it looks like we're going to have to do that, so that we can begin to test that now and make sure we can do it.
If I, Chairman Crosby, I think you mentioned this, too. We were talking about the same thing. So I think, if what I understand, we'll take the target that is, I'll use the term standard for lack of a better word, is probably more likely construction-wise, that is longer. But we will do an assessment, emergency preparedness, I call it.
Right.
Because we'll look at what we would have to do if that schedule tightened up.
Yeah, and in concrete terms, so if we have to shift gears over a space of a couple of weeks, based on a decision we make, we can then switch to that plan.
But which plan would he be starting on?
You'd start with the longer plan. That would be you start to implement the longer plan, but you'd have the Plan B mapped out so that if we needed to implement it, we could implement it quickly.
And we're
To
starting
avoid
with a
the-
little bit of both right now, so.
Right.
No, I understand that. I understand, but we're talking about getting farther down. It seems to me that that Gail's concern is a realistic one. And it is realistic both in terms of the actuality of having to do it and in terms of the message we may implicitly but accidentally be sending. And so if we have a longer-term rollout plan, that is the one we're going to go with, the most fiscally prudent one, the most prudent in terms of error reduction. But at the same time, we've got Plan B, which is the emergency plan, and we've tested it, and we are convinced it can work, and we've tweaked it. So it's ready to go if we have to do it. That would be a process that would be good.
I did hear you say, though, that you would prefer not to be working paper automation. You would want to go full steam ahead now with automation. Did hear you say that, correct?
Well, yes, I did, and I would, you know, from the perspective that, at least that's part of the message I got even as I come on board, is the commission wants to be an online agency, essentially, an automated agency. Have that as a foundation of the operation, not starting out as a paper agency and trying to convert later. So that's the kind of the direction that I've been trying to move forward in the plan. So I think it's more consistent. I think it's less expensive for us to steadily move forward in that direction. So that would be my ideal world.
Yeah,
But
well-
can we plan for an emergency, you know, I mean, to make sure we've allowed for a decision? I think that's what I'm hearing.
But let me just pick up on that point, because maybe I'm wrong, but it seems to me that if we use the paper system as Plan B, there are ways of structuring the paper so that it can be uploaded into the system that we ultimately get with, in an automated fashion. I mean, that happens, and if we looked at the vendor and talked to the vendor and the implementer, or whatever it's called, I'll bet we could find a way that we could structure the spreadsheets to most easily do that, for example. I recognize your reluctance, and I share it, to do both of the, to start with paper and then to move to an automation thing. But again, I don't think that's necessarily an on-off switch. It's not, we're going to have to do the paper and then sit down and have somebody manually upload each data point into the system.
Well, and that's only one part of it.
I know,
Just
but
one
those are
example.
just examples
Yeah,
of,
but there are a lot, but I think we have to bite the bullet and say one thing or the other. Yes, we can say one and then change it, whichever way it is. And what you're saying now is, let's say right now, operate on the assumption that it's going to be it's going to be whatever what is it? You say in your other, in your new
11
target?
months.
Pardon?
At 11 months.
11 months, okay. Assume it's going to be 11 months. That spending plan is the one then that you will adhere to. However, if we find out that you have to be ready way or sooner than that, sort of in the, well, actually, the way to deal with it would be to say, when it happens, you know, and you stop everything and you say, where are we? What do we have to jury rig? And we jury rig. And we don't worry about that until we make the decision and find out whether we really do have to move the date back. Is that what you're proposing, Jim?
yes, no. It's either one or the other, right? I'm proposing.
I'm going to look at the statute and see what authority I have here.
It's not statutory. I'm proposing that we adhere to the longer plan, but at the same time, from a planning standpoint, we spend some time thinking about what we would have to do if it turns out in February we have to shift gears. Is it possible to shift gears and meet a July deadline? I would really hate to get to February, the end of middle or the end of February, while we're going ahead on the default plan, and find out that stop everything, we're going to be ready, is not possible. We just can't be ready because we're now 3 months down.
But so you are saying, go down 2 paths. You're
No,
saying-
I'm not.
You're
I'm
saying
not
go
saying-
down one and be ready to go down the other.
No, I'm saying, have spend some time now thinking about
Okay, but
what
that's
path to.
semantics, Jimmy. You're saying to him, you gotta be ready to do either.
I'm saying to Rick, we've got to have some idea that going down path A, the default path, and stopping and shifting to go down path B, if we have to, is realistic, as opposed to pie in the sky. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, I
And
mean,
that may be semantics, it may not be semantics.
it's a-
I don't think
it's
it
a-
is.
Well, I mean, I think if you're the people who are in the firing line who are trying to, how much time do you want? Do you want 2 hours worth of work? Do you want 2 weeks worth of work? Do you want 2 months worth of work? How much of a plan do you want? I mean, if you're trying to retain the option to do both, then let's say we're trying to retain the option to do both. Or let's pick one or the other. But I think we've gone back and forth, and he gets signal. I mean, we do have to talk about this thing. He gets signals from different commissioners at different times.
Oh, I know.
One says, go like gangbusters, get ready. One says, don't spend a nickel more than you possibly have to. That's a tough situation under which to operate. And what we have all agreed, the commissioners who are concerned about money, is there are 3 different scenarios. We issue our licenses on the schedule we've always anticipated, basically January and August. If that, for 2 more, in April. If that happens, cash is not an issue. You know, we've got to talk to our vendors, talk to our licensees, make sure they know what's coming, you know, be careful, but there's no issue. There's no cash issue. Second is we don't issue them when we are planning to, but we issue them within 2-3 months, you know, given the sort of everyday run-of-the-mill delays. That probably we can also manage, not an issue. That's not a cash issue. That might be an issue that the Commonwealth doesn't get its $175 million, but it doesn't, we can deal with it. The third is that with all the changes that have happened, with referendums failing and background checks being problematic, that all of a sudden it ends up we don't issue licenses for the foreseeable future. And that concerns some commissioners, that might be, you know, we don't have an A license or a B license, or we don't have either an A license or a B license because of the effects of referenda and background checks. That does cause a lot of problems, including major cash problems. We will pretty much know that by mid-December. So one thing we've talked about is let's make some assumption, and I would argue we have to decide some assumption between now and mid-December, because by mid-December we'll know about background checks and referenda. That's one solution we had come to. You know, if we can take cash off the table once we know we're going to issue these licenses, more or less when we've been talking about issuing these licenses.
But right now, we have 3 applicants for slots license that have successfully completed
We're gonna have
phase
that
1.
license.
Correct,
Yeah.
that's my point, and that's, I think, what we're dealing with right now. And it really is just the best way to move forward with that. And I'm just making the point that we have the ability to be fair to all 3 applicants and not be saying, well, we better not consider this because we're not ready. I think we have to be able to, and it's fair, it has to be fair to all of them, that we're evaluating it all right now. And they each have brought advantages to the table economically, which, you know, that we're evaluating, one against the other. And the only way to do that fairly is to be ready if one of the 3 is the first, or, you know, they each have distinctly different timeframes for when they could be ready. And that's part of our evaluation process. So it's just, I think we have a real equity issue if we're saying we're not ready, even though you are, and that's your economic advantage. So that's where this all started, and I know it's not that easy, and it's just the best way to move forward, Director, and I think and it does seem to me that to try to plan long and then all of a sudden go short is much more difficult than the opposite.
But if you're to say that is to say, therefore you have to say to the director, to Director Day, and be prudent about it, be careful, don't be crazy, but spend whatever money you have to spend in order to make that possible.
Well, when you say spend whatever money, I mean, it really is technology moving ahead with automation, and that will cost some money up front, and then when January comes, it may be, okay, now we have a clear picture and then, to me, that's the better time to make an adjustment than
But
to
between
try
now-
to do the
But
opposite.
between now and then, he would do what?
Plan for the shorter time, and that means some additional hours on the automation piece, which will have to be used. It's just those hours would be spread out or not. And hiring planning now, and again, that could be adjusted. I just think it's, thinking of a planning, emergency planning as well as, it's just much easier to go from short to longer than it is from longer to shorter. That's difficult, and I understand the two ways to do it, and you may tell us that is okay, to do it that way.
Well, he did say it is okay. He just needs to
Well-
be able to spend the money to do it, that's all. He said, yes, if I had the money, I could do it. So you're saying give him the money.
I've already made my point, but I just want to, I don't think you start thinking about whether lifeboat capacity when you got a hole in the hull. And
What?
it seems to me that all I'm asking, all I'm suggesting is that we take a look at what Plan B is going to look like to make sure it's realistic, and that we go with Plan A, the longer stretch. So we just assure ourselves that we can shift gears and get to July if we have to get to July. What would that do? Is that realistic to go down a path or not? Not with fine-grained detail, but just to make sure the lifeboats have enough capacity.
Are you prepared to say is that in your mind clear enough to Rick where you can say, okay, Rick, you don't have to come to the commission and get your expenditures approved, just you understand what the rules are. Whatever it was that Jim said, do that and pay for it.
Do we have a consensus that that's the best way to go? I'm not sure that we do. I know that is one suggestion, but I'm not sure that, even the executive director, I'd like to hear if he thinks it's easier to plan long and then go short rather than be prepared.
Well, if it isn't obvious, the chair was referring to me when I was talking about the one concerned about the money. And I would, I think it's been a very long meeting and we ought to think about adjourning, but what we've contemplated in terms of cash flows are only options at this point. I personally don't know how feasible each of these options are. We need to talk to people outside of this commission to effectuate them. And because of that uncertainty, in addition to the possibility that that some of these deadlines might have to be extended against our wishes because of surrounding community issues. I mean, we get surrounding communities telling us extend the deadline. There's not enough time. That has a direct cash flow implication because our plan is predicated on the award of the license, of all licenses, not just one. The good news is the Category 2 is looking very positive, in my opinion. They're very advanced. Today is a great testament to those surrounding community discussions. For one, there's 3 eager applicants working real hard and reimbursing our costs, I might add, which is great. That is not necessarily the landscape in the other 2 regions. And I was also remembering just a year ago, we were forecasting the award of the licenses, all licenses, earlier than we are now. We have also gotten closer to that time, and at least for me, the degree of confidence has, in terms of that time, making that time frame, has diminished a little bit. Not a whole lot, but it has diminished. It hasn't gone up, and we've gotten closer. And those are the factors that factor in when I'm thinking about everything that is being said here. So I could take, and maybe I should, take the approach of, Director Day, you tell us how you're going to do it and how you're going to pay for it. Because from my perspective, it is not clear to me how we're going to do that.
I'm not going to add something that will delay things, but hopefully
That's right.
smooth
No,
things
and this is,
along.
unfortunately, this is important. I mean, and when you got 5 cooks, you
Just
got
talking to
5
the
cooks.
director, that it may become clearer in the next couple of weeks, the actual timetable for the step-up of that temporary facility, as the mitigation team and the building design team take a look at the permitting issues. You know, as the commissioner mentioned, perhaps those permitting issues might put the construction timetable at a later time, or I mean, maybe exactly right. But it's an unknown right now that might become more well-known in the next few weeks as we get to the December hearings. And in terms of whether or not something is immediately necessary in the next week, I think the director just said that it's not necessary for these major expenditures in the next week or so.
Yeah, the only thing we'll be moving forward with, or both, we'd go ahead with both assistant directors, which we can do that anyway. We can hire that, we can slow down hiring if we need to, so. If Commission wanted to think about it for the next meeting and see what happens with the surrounding communities and those kind of things and come back. I mean, that's.
But if you're okay with that, I am. But I got the impression that there were decision points that we were coming to where you were getting mixed signals and you felt you needed answers. If you don't think you do, then let's kick this can down the road. I'm all in favor.
Well, I'm normally comfortable with kicking it down a little ways. I just wouldn't want it to go too far.
Well, you got to put a stake in the ground and tell us
Yeah.
what you need and when, and stick to it. You know, so that I now don't know for sure what you think you need when, and I need to know that so I can figure out which side of this ball I want to argue on. You know, I'm saying literally, I don't know for sure what you think you need in order to get to wherever it is you think we want you to go, and you need to maybe you and John and Derek and David got to put your heads together and figure out, you know, what do you need to satisfy this hydra-headed monster that's giving you direction?
Well, and I want to make it the idea, and when John asked me, you know, is there anything like next week or within this week that I'm going to miss that's critical? I'm going to continue to go ahead with the 7-month plan until I hear something different, is basically what from my perspective, what I'd be doing. So if that's another week from now or something, there's nothing that's going to derail the railroad, so to speak. But as we move forward, we then got to go hiring. We've got to move rules ahead. We've got to start acquiring equipment, get the licensing system. I mean, we need to be able to prepare the long term to move forward. A week
Okay.
isn't going to be the end of the world.
Fine. Okay. What else? Was that the last one?
I thought maybe that was enough.
You sure you don't have anything else? It's been fun.
No, I don't.
All right, do we have a motion to adjourn? Or does anybody really want to stay?
How about
Another six
an
things
acclamation vote for that one?
6 more?
I have 6 more items.
An acclamation vote to adjourn is accepted.
Yay.